A missile strike on a market in the Ukrainian town of Kostiantynivka in the eastern region of Donetsk on September 6th killed 16 people. Zelensky blamed Russia, of course.
Right, the offensive in Ukraine, and the nation denies these allegations as well. Let's just take a look at all the updates. Now, Zelensky blamed Russia, but was it the result of a Ukrainian air defense missile going off course? That's the big question. The Ukrainian president, in fact, implored world leaders gathered at the UN General Assembly on Tuesday to stand united against Russia's invasion. Now, Russia, China and Iran continue to forge closer ties with each other. Beijing's policy towards the Ukraine war has threaded the needle of avoiding outward criticism of Russia while chastising the United States as China's strategic rival. China's Wang Yi kicked off a 4-day visit to Moscow with a meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the latest in a series of high-level contact between the two strategic allies.
I think if she really makes her...
President Vladimir Putin will meet China's Xi Jinping for talks in Beijing in October. The visit will mark Putin's first known trip abroad since an arrest warrant was issued against him over the deportation of children from Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Russian Defence Minister arrived in Iran for meetings to deepen Moscow's defence ties with Tehran. Shoigu said, and I quote here, Iran is Russia's strategic partner in the Middle East.
Now, on the same day, the Biden administration also issued fresh Iran-related sanctions targeting multiple people and entities in Iran, Russia, China and Turkey in connection with Tehran's drone and military aircraft development. Iran has been accused of supplying Moscow with armed drones for its offensive in Ukraine, and the nation denies these allegations. Now, to discuss this further, we were earlier joined by correspondent Susan Teherani, who tells us how the Russia-Ukraine conflict is being perceived by the UN General Assembly as a whole. Let's listen in.
President Biden dedicated a good part of his speech calling on the international community to support Ukraine. For much of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States as well as Europeans have lamented at how few countries outside the Western world have really put their weight behind Ukraine. And with the war dragging on, President Biden understands that many of those countries simply just want to move on. Leaders in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and elsewhere, including the Middle East, understand Russia's ruse. However, they don't think that Russian President Vladimir Putin is completely wrong when he calls out Western hypocrisy. Nonetheless, the president's speech set the stage for his Ukrainian counterpart to address the UNGA. Both men had a similar tone in calling on the international community to, of course, support Ukraine against Russia's aggression. However, before those two speeches, the Brazilian President Lula da Silva took the stage and said dialogue may be the only path forward in finding a peaceful resolution to the conflict. He said, quote unquote, no solution will be lasting if it's not based on a dialogue. President Biden is expected to sit down with Brazilian President Lula da Silva here in New York before departing for Washington, where he will host Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
All right, Susan further updates us on the status of the upcoming meeting between New York Mayor Eric Adams and President Biden. Listen in.
Last year this time, not only did Mayor Adams meet with President Joe Biden, they attended a high-dollar Democratic fundraiser. What a difference a year makes. Now relations between the two men are in tatters over New York's migrant crisis. Mayor Adams has a busy and diverse schedule this week. He's meeting the Swedish Prime Minister as well as Pakistani leaders and the mayor of Seoul, South Korea, but not with President Biden. Critics argue that the president is ignoring New York's migrant crisis while coming to the city for 3 days and instead addressing challenges around the world from Europe to Asia to Africa. Both Mayor Adams and New York Governor Kathy Hochul, core Democrats have pleaded the federal government for help and assistance in addressing this migrant crisis. However, the Biden administration is frustrated that Mayor Adams and New York in general have aired their desire for help publicly in a way that seems like there is inter-party conflict in an election year. However, it's also important to note that the majority of Americans, about 64%, disapprove of President Biden's handling on immigration.